everyone, and welcome back. Today we are talking about the Underground Railroad, based on a novel. The Underground Railroad follows Cora, a young woman who escapes a Georgia plantation, only to be hunted down by the ruthless slave catcher Cora Ridgeway. Written by Colson Whitehead, the Underground Railroad is a work of historical fiction which reimagines the Underground Railroad, which was a network of secret routes and safe houses that African Americans used to escape slavery as little choo-choo trains. As a result, he's able to use fiction not to undermine reality or manipulate facts, but to emphasize the humanity of his characters and all those who endured slavery. This is what allows Barry Jenkins to adapt this novel into a 10-part, limited series, which is simply a masterpiece now airing on Prime Video. So the first thing I was most impressed by was Barry Jenkins himself. This is a very confident, very brave adaptation of a novel with a lot at stake. And although he draws attention to the horrors of slavery, he does so without risking his artistic integrity. And I feel like a lot of what you do, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so much nowadays is focused on being didactic in terms of, focused on meaning or creating something that, has a message. But in this, he does not give you any easy outs. This is not a story of slave versus slave catcher or white versus black. He does not allow you to simplify his work this way. And the opening sequence kind of sets that up right away, where you have Cora and the slave catcher falling down a well. And the way it's positioned is that the slave catcher is underneath, as if to say, although slavery is the shadow that hangs over Black America, these horrors do not have to dictate how we tell these stories. And I think because Barry Jenkins put himself as a filmmaker first, his job is to be a storyteller, and through that we're able to connect. And this is why this is simply, not just in terms of the messaging, but from an artistic standpoint, from a filmmaking standpoint, it's stunning. It's stunning. There is not enough time or energy to really, I don't have the words to describe how this is a must watch. If you have not watched it, it will take a long time, but I promise you with all my heart, it will be worth it. The breakdown of this video is listed in the description box below. We'll talk about characters, compare characters, themes, all that good stuff. So first I want to talk about Cora, played by Tuso Mandu. And this is A Star is Born. I don't have enough words in the English dictionary to describe how amazing and breathtaking this performance was. And so Cora is a slave who lives on a Georgia plantation. And her life on the plantation is quite alienated because her mother abandoned her when she was a child, leaving her to fend for herself. And the limited series starts off right away when she's approached by Caesar, who asks her, "Do you want to run away with me? I feel like you'd be my good luck charm." And at first she's hesitant, but after witnessing the grisly murder of another slave, she realizes, you know what, actually I will come with you. And I love how they framed it as a love story first, that although you don't see a lot of their interactions, you feel a lot of their interactions. And sadly for Cora and Caesar, their time is short-lived as they exchange one killing field for another. So they get to South Carolina, and it's essentially an experimental farm. And at first you're looking around and you're like, oh, this place looks okay. They can read, they can have socials, it seems okay. And then you realize they're killing the Black men and performing surgeries on Black women in order to prevent them from having children. And one of the beautiful things about Cora's journey is her ability to affirm herself by looking back at people. So how she comes to realize that there's a problem here is she asks her teacher, where are all the Black children? And the teacher looks back at her shocked, how dare you ask me that question? And so this teacher tries to get the power back by saying, you know what, they go to another town, but this doesn't concern you because there's something wrong with your blood work and you're gonna have the surgery anyways. And Cora looks at her not only does she ask the question, she looks back at her and says, I know you're full of shit. And this kind of shocks her teacher, right? And this whole idea of looking back is perfectly played out in this episode, because at one point she works in a museum, and the irony here. So for white people during this time, the world was indeed your museum, right? You look around, you can touch things, you can move around freely, do whatever you want, knowing that nobody can touch you, nothing can bring harm to you, but the opposite is not true, right? And so by the time Caesar and Cora realize there's an issue, things are too late, and the slave catcher catches up with them. And so you're kind of wondering, where is Caesar, right? And Caesar is an interesting character because he he never imagined that he'd work on a plantation. Like, he was sold into slavery quite late. And so, you know, he's somebody who can read. He had different sort of aspirations for himself. So there was never really a scenario in which he could stay on the plantation. And this scene, the last time we see Caesar, he's looking Ridgeway right in the eye, as if to say, like, I don't care how much power you have. Like, I am better than you. And I am going to let you know that I see you for what you are. And so this is a turning point, because you realize actually this isn't going to be a love story, and this will be a story about memory. Because the thing is, even though Cora knows that he's dead, she still refuses to forget him. Like, he's still in her head, and he's in her head as like an encouraging figure, as someone kind of pushing her forward. And so the Underground Railway then becomes not a series of locations, but a series of people that she keeps in her heart that kind of pushes her forward every single time. And so she gets to North Carolina, and North Carolina is something else. North Carolina is, so they pretty much exterminated all the black people. They're saying that they don't even want them as slaves. And it is indeed true that the savagery man is capable of when he deems his cause to be just. And just a side note, whoever played Martin, like, not a performance was wasted. Like, this, like, Barry Jenkins does not allow you to simplify his work. This was an extraordinary episode, and there's just a lot to say about it. And it's here that she meets Grace. And through Grace, Cora starts to kind of sense or sort of get the desire to pay it forward. You know, like, although she's not in a position to help them, like, she says, you know what, I will get us out of here. I'm going to help us. I'll take care of you. You know, she's caressing her. She's doing the best she can, even though Grace is the one taking care of her and looking out for her. But that doesn't really stop her from wanting to, you know, be the one to take that position. And so by the time Ridgeway comes, she's willing to sacrifice herself for Grace in hopes that she'll make it further than she did. And this confrontation between Ridgeway and Cora for the first time, I mean, she looks him dead in the eye, right? Like, she comes out to meet him. He's discombobulated. He's completely shook. He's like, huh? Like, he doesn't know what to think. And in this moment, you kind of see their nature, right? Like, Cora is very brave, whereas Ridgeway is just a cowardly son of a... So before I compare Cora and Ridgeway, I just want to talk about Ridgeway, played by Joel Edgerton. And this was a wow performance from beginning to end. This dude just... It was phenomenal. Like, every time he came on screen, he was triggering. And I hope he gets all the awards he deserves, because the way he plays them is quite nuanced. And this performance is it just gets under your skin. Like, that's how good it is. And so Ridgeway, in short, is a man with a chip on his shoulder. And he has this desire not only to be great, but to be seen as this great man. And growing up, he was never made to feel like he was better or worse. And a lot of that had to do with his father. So his father was a blacksmith, and Ridgeway wasn't really much of a blacksmith. And this kind of frustrated him. And not only that, like, he wasn't really made to feel like he was good at anything. And so he would see his father validating all these people, but not him. And the thing that irked him the most is this idea of the Great Spirit, the idea that, like, everybody has something in them that you have to respect. And Ridgeway couldn't really tolerate this because he has this inferiority complex, this need to be respected, like, put respect on my name. And that's a lot of the reason that he was attracted to slave catching, because of the hierarchy. Like, he gets off on this hierarchy, like being above people and being recognized as having some type of power over others. And he said that the Great Spirit doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is the American imperative, which for him is like this divine right. Like, he is inherently superior. And his job is he kind of equates himself with like a missionary. Like, his job is to get out there and restore order. And a lot of the reason he really kind of goes after Cora is because of her mother. He was never able to catch her mother. And because of that, he has a lot of resentment for this family, because he feels like his mother outsmarted him. You know, he could never really figure out what happened to Cora's mother. And that's something that haunts him and plagues him, and has kind of destroyed his ego. So we get to Tennessee Exodus, and this episode was like tough. It was fire and brimstone, and the contrast between the two. This episode was important for a lot of reasons, because first, it marked Cora's rebirth, and the beginning of Ridgway's downfall. In the Tennessee episodes, Ridgway has the audacity to sit Cora down and pretty much lecture her about the imperative, and his whole thing is that he is the necessary evil. And his thing is that the hierarchy is natural. Like, it's the ones that don't know their place that are a minority and that need to be set right again. And you can see that with his partner Homer. So he bought this little black boy Homer for $5, and he actually kind of drew up his emancipation papers. And the idea of slavery apparently disgusts Ridgway. Like, it doesn't appeal to him at all. And there's a few things to note about Homer. Like, yes, we hate him, and yes, we wanted to, like, that kid, whew, like, you know, it's just, he's a complicated character, but, you know, at night he would kind of train himself up. And what I got out of that is that, you know, in case somebody came by, they'd just assume that he was a slave. But Ridgway's point is that as much as I tried to shoo him away and all this, like, you know, at least, like, he trusts him completely. Like, it doesn't occur to him that Homer will ever do anything against him. And not only that, he kind of makes Homer in his image, right? Like, you got to be watchful like me. You got to be disciplined like me. Like me, like me, like me. And again, this hierarchy for him is natural. There's no need, you know what I mean? Like, Homer has accepted his place, as should everybody else. And so he's looking at Cora and her mother, and the thing about her mother is that he kind of imagines her laughing at him. And this undermines how he's perceived, right? Like, he can't control it. The idea that he can't find somebody, really he's hurt by the fact that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. And so during this conversation, he also breaks it to her, like, what happened to Caesar and how he was basically ripped apart by a mob. And in telling her this, the point that he wants to make is that it doesn't matter, like, you know, although we pretty up words and although we kind of come up with all these definitions and philosophies, like, it's all the same, you know what I mean? And it doesn't make it any less true. His point is, like, you know what, I don't care what you say, like, at the end of the day, like, most people agree with what I have to say. And again, he really sees these runaways as a minority that can kind of disrupt the system. So the other weird thing about this interaction with Ridgway and Cora is the fact that he actually brings Cora to his father's room. So his father is dying, and Ridgway kind of drags Cora into the room, and he sits next to his father, and he's like, you need to admit that the spirit is bullshit. And, you know, like, and again, he has this, like, he can't function. He really has this desire to be seen as great. And in this kind of dreamlike sequence, his dad looks at him and says, I wish I'd done more to shape the man. And he's horrified. And correct me if I'm wrong, like, this was definitely like some type of dream sequence. And it kind of indicates to me that he knows deep down that he's bullshit. And that he is just, it's like the hate that keeps him going. And so he's kind of talking about the Great Spirit and how awful it is and this imperative. And just before Cora is rescued, the only thing standing between Ridgway and a gun is Mac. So while they were in town, Royal basically saw Cora chained up and decided that he wanted to help her. So they walk into Ridgway's house and they take Cora out of there. And the only reason that Ridgway is alive is because of Mac. So Mac is basically someone who is very close to Ridgway's father, and he says, you know what, this is a house of mourning, and I promise that Ridgway will not bother you or kind of disturb you. Like, I'm sorry he's like this. Like, I'll take care of it. And of course, this was a fatal error in judgment. But what happens afterwards is even more interesting, because when Ridgway realizes that it was Mac that pretty much saved him in a lot of ways, he kind of goes on and on about the spirit. And his point is like, okay, let's just say the spirit exists. Now let's just say that there is this goodness. So what? You know, like, so what? Nothing can protect it. Because at the end of the day, this sort of spirit will always be extinguished by the will of a man whose heart is sort of pumping with hate. And the irony here, it's like, in fact, it's this great spirit in Mac and his humanity that saved you. And think about Ridgway. He wants to be seen as this great man and all these things, but he refuses to see other people. And the only way people can see your humanity is if you see theirs, right? So he's sitting there talking about how hate will always extinguish this great spirit. And essentially, love is simple. And by simple, he means weak. You know, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it cannot defend itself. And based on his weird theory of evolution, it can't survive. And hate is essential. And Mac is looking at him and it's like, but I saved you. Like, it's my humanity. That's why you're still alive. And I understand that Ridgway was chained to a bed, but I don't think he would have the balls to shoot Mac, right? Because he's very jealous. here's a man that his father really admired, really loved, that he grew up really resenting because he couldn't get the same love back from his father. And in the end, he couldn't even shoot him, right? He made Homer shoot him. And it just speaks to Ridgway's cowardice, and again, just his blindness. So following this encounter, Ridgway is more motivated to catch Cora. He's learned nothing from this experience. And for Cora, she learns two things. First, it's like a runaway catching a runaway, but what she recognizes is that she's running away to something better and he's running away from himself. And for her, it was a rebirth, right? Because during this time with Ridgway, she saw a fellow runaway kind of give up. He gave up and she wanted to give up. And so she got this second win. And the second thing she learns is that although nothing lasts forever, nothing is impossible. So we get to the Valentine Farm, and these two episodes, especially episode 9, it's like a masterpiece within a masterpiece. Like this was a wow episode. And here, I'm glad they gave her another love interest. It's like good people really do indeed find good people. And despite all these horrible things, she kind of keeps like the good memories alive. Like she doesn't remember not just the bad, but also the good. And it's this that keeps her open and able to see other people's humanity, and in turn, they can kind of see hers. And so Royal was a real one. They didn't have as much time together as we would have liked, but still, like, the potential was there. So we get to Indiana, and it's like this kind of weird utopia, and it kind of offsets the false promises of South Carolina. And it's a community. It seems like a dream place, and Cora is shocked. She's like, what is happening here? And although she's welcomed, she doesn't feel very welcomed. So the thing about Valentine's Farm is that runaways they don't stay for very long. So although they kind of harbor them, they're on their way. And so Cora is kind of threatening their very safety because she has nowhere else to go and she wants to stay there. And the biggest person who's kind of against this is Brother Mingo. And Brother Mingo pretty much suffers from the same thing that Ridgway suffers from, which is hubris, right? He's flying way too close to the sun. And with Brother Mingo, he bought his family out of slavery. He's someone who's worked very hard. And for him, he sees no correlation between him and Cora. And he doesn't want to see any correlation between the two of them. He looks at her like a runaway, a slave, a fugitive, like anything to kind of undermine her humanity so he doesn't have to feel as bad. And the thing about Valentine's Farm is it's supposed to be this place where, people can come and seek refuge. And his thing is like, no, not all of us will make it, and some of y'all have to be sacrificed. The owner of the farm, this guy Valentine, he's the opposite of Brother Mingo. He doesn't seem too attached to the place. And for him, it's imperative that they maintain their autonomy. So he doesn't really care. He's just kind of like, we can start over somewhere else. And he says something interesting, like a useless delusion is better than a useful truth, in that you may be right, and these runaways could be kind of threatening our safety, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, and that doesn't mean that, one day this can't be a safe place, what I mean, for those who need it. But Brother Mingo refuses to see it, and he is just something else. And the thing about him is that he really feels like the dollar, like if he can kind of make enough money and make something of himself, they will see and respect him, right? Like his need to be respected and to be seen as good will somehow transcend the color of his skin. And this is not the case, right? So in trying to protect all that they've kind of created and built, he ends up destroying it, right? So he ends up inviting these white men over to see their democratic process, to see how civilized and how, equal they are to the white man. When in fact, Brother Mingo, you should have just moved in silence, right? In trying to save them, he completely killed them, and he kind of killed himself, right? And so we get to this massacre, and this episode is probably the best episode, I would say, in this entire series. And Ridgway somehow convinces the good people of Indiana to raid Valentine's Farm in hopes of finding Cora. And of course, he finds her, and it's not enough to find her this time. He wants to find the railroad. He wants to end this right here, right now. And so she takes him there, and of course, he dies in the Underground Railroad. I mean, of course he dies in the railroad. So she drags him down in an attempt to get free again. And the fact that he dies there, first of all, we come full circle. We now realize the man that was, in that first scene was Ridgway. And the thing with him is that he keeps saying that it doesn't matter where you go. Like, you can escape as many times as you like, but I'm going to come after you. I will be the shadow hanging over you until you die, until you submit. And what does she do? she grabs Royal's gun. So her love interest in this unfortunately died, but she's able to get his gun and she shoots Ridgeway in the face. And why is this important? She shoots Ridgeway in the face as a way of kind of acknowledging, you know what, yeah, although this horror and the amount of trauma you've caused me and my family is something that that will stay with me, I control the narrative. You know what I mean? I will erase you. I will make you a footnote. I will minimize your importance, and I will shoot you right now. And that's his thing. He doesn't think she has the balls, because in his mind, this hierarchy is natural, you know, and he is sitting there mumbling sweet nothings about the imperative to conquer, civilize, whatever the hell it is he was trying to say. And again, it's natural, you know, like he is inherently braver, stronger, and because she is black, she's weaker. And by shooting him, what she does is she changes that narrative, right? She kind of minimizes his importance. And yeah, although you are this horror that, you know, stains my soul, you don't control me. You don't control where I go, and I'm not gonna fear for my life because of you. I might have to fear for my life because of other things, but as far as your part in my life, it ends now. And so, you know, the fact that he died in the railroad, and like there's just so much to unpack here, but yeah, good riddance is all I have to say. So just before she takes the railroad, she goes back upstairs to see if she can kind of save anyone, and she finds Molly. And this instinct to go back, it's really quite sad, because she got this instinct actually from her mother, Mabel. And so we come to find out that actually her mother didn't abandon her. And in a flashback episode, we see that Mabel's friend basically killed 2 babies, and she was kind of tasked with cleaning up the mess. And kind of in her shock, she goes for this long walk. And halfway through the walk, she turns around and she realizes she forgot her daughter. But unfortunately, she was kind of bitten by a snake and she dies. So she never actually escaped. And so, but of course, Cora doesn't know this. But the fact that Cora's mom, Mabel, went back for her, this instinct to go back and to think of others is something that she got from her mother. So she grabs Molly and she has this maternal instinct. She wants to take care of her. And the interesting thing about this railroad is that nobody knew how it worked. Like nobody knew you know, where it led. And Royal actually brought her down here saying, hey, like, does any of this look familiar? And, you know, and she got kind of offended at the time saying, excuse me, sir? Because she had been on so many railroads at this point and so many different journeys. And he wasn't doing it to offend her, right? He was doing it to kind of inspire her and be like, hey, this is something that you can consider. Like, you're a lot stronger and a lot braver than you think. And it was an invitation, and she kind of took it the wrong way. But anyways, like, she manages out of panic to figure out how this railroad works. She grabs Molly, and I think it's interesting that it required 2 people to move it, which again speaks to the fact that she's on the right side of history, you know, and her instincts are correct. And again, despite these horrible experiences, she's selfless. Whereas Ridgeway died, you know, and so they get to the other side and they're able to somehow miraculously find somebody that is able to take them in. And that's how the series ends. So before I get to my final thoughts, I do have to touch on some changes that Barry Jenkins made from the book to the limited series. You know, I didn't want to be that person who's like, well, in the book they knew this and then no. So the changes he made were quite aggressive, and I'm going to just list a few that I thought were quite striking. And if you notice more, please lay them out in the comment section below. So the first sort of change I noticed is with Jasper and Grace. So Jasper is the runaway that Cora met while she was with Ridgeway. And in the limited series, he is basically, the way he's killed by Ridgeway is that he essentially freezes to death. Whereas in the book, Ridgeway shoots him. And this is an important change because this change kind of enables Cora to get this rebirth. The second big change is with Grace. In the book, there's no Grace. So Cora is alone in Martin's attic for months. She's all by herself. And what Grace does is sort of emphasize Cora's desire to pay it forward. You know, like all the changes that Barry made were to kind of emphasize what's driving Cora and really kind of bring out who it is she wants to be moving forward. The third big change that I noticed was with the rescue. So in the book, the way that Royal rescues Cora, it kind of happens out in the open. Like they spot her in town and it happens while they're kind of camping out. In the limited series, Royal, they walk into this white man's house. Like this is a very aggressive change. Like they walk into his house, they put a gun to this man's head and they were ready to kill him. And the fact that they were walking into his house, again, emphasizes the fact that although people like Ridgeway, yes, you can kill us, the reverse is true also. You know, we can come after you, and you're not as untouchable as you think you are. Like this sort of hierarchy, this natural subordination, this ain't it. Finally, the biggest change that I noticed was the ending. So in the book, Cora kind of drags Ridgeway down into the Underground Railroad, but she doesn't shoot him. Like he kind of dies of his injuries. In the limited series, Cora shoots him. And this is massive. Like this is a massive, massive change, because what it does is emphasize her autonomy. It emphasizes her ability to make decisions for herself and kind of get rid of this fear that people like Ridgeway really require in order to maintain power. So the changes that Barry makes restores the character's humanity by doing two things: restoring autonomy and maintaining vulnerability. So let's talk about autonomy. So you look at Cora and Ridgeway, right? Ridgeway is somebody who really maximizes his importance in Cora's life. He sees himself as, it doesn't matter what she does, he will be the most important thing in her life. So by shooting him, she kind of minimizes his importance, right? She takes back the ability to control the narrative and tell the story, and this allows him from narrating anything or kind of controlling how she is seen, right? She takes that power away. The second is maintaining vulnerability. So maintaining vulnerability, the best way to kind of explain this is through Brother Mingo. So here you have somebody who, although a slave, a former slave, is unable and will not connect with Cora. He refuses to see her as anything but he sees her as a runaway, a fugitive. He doesn't want to connect to her. And Cora's perspective is like, I can respect that. You know, like whatever the vote is, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna honor it. And just because he doesn't want to see her humanity doesn't mean that she doesn't see his. And this kind of, the importance on maintaining vulnerability and kind of seeing the goodness in people, even though they refuse to see it in you, is what allows these stories to be told from a perspective of hope and perseverance instead of horror and hate, right? Okay, so now we get to my final thoughts. So the only way I can kind of articulate or express what I got out of this limited series is to discuss one of the most beautiful dream sequences in this entire show. So just before the massacre at Valentine's Farm, Cora's in her room and she's burning this map. So the way that Cora remembers the Underground Railroad and all these places that she has been to is she kind of has this map, but she has the names of people written on it just to remember all the people that she's encountered, and she burns it, right? She burns it because of all the horrible things that have happened. And shortly thereafter, she has a dream. She has a dream of going down the same railroad that she's on, and it takes her to this magnificent station, right? It's something else. It's something, this Grand Central. And unfortunately, she's not able to move on to the next station. So she gets to the counter. And the thing about the Underground Railroad is that in order to go on the next train, you have to testify. You basically have to give an account of who you are. There has to be a history of you moving from one place to another. And so the person at the counter was telling her, okay, what happened in Indiana? And this was a good use of foreshadowing. And she's like, yeah, no, I testified there. And they're looking through the records and they're like, you never gave any testimony in Indiana. So until we sort this all out, you're gonna have to wait. She's like, what am I supposed to do in the meantime? And the lady was like, you need to make friends. Like, we need to sort this out. And while she's waiting, this impending doom kicks in, right? And she gets this voice in her head telling her the train is leaving, the train is going, and she's kind of chasing this voice, and the person she sees is Caesar. And Caesar is standing there looking fine as hell, and she runs over to him, right? She doesn't care about the train at that point. She's so happy to see him. She just wants to hold him, and she's so happy, right? This memory of him, even though I think some part of her wanted to bury it, it just brought her so much joy, right? And so she's dancing with him, and he says, we can stay here for as long as you like. It's up to you. And she wants to hold on to him for dear life. And as much as she wants to forget this man, she can't, right? He opened up a door that she didn't even think was possible. And the reason she wants to forget him is because she has Ridgeway's voice in her head, right? He keeps kind of narrating Caesar's death. He had his eyes kind of plucked out of him. And that's all she can think of whenever she thinks of Caesar. And she wants this memory gone. And what I got out of these two scenes is the importance of kind of rearranging the order that people like Ridgeway have in telling these stories. Because as hard as Ridgeway has tried, his existence really depends on him being perceived exactly as he wants to be perceived. So by kind of killing him, she restores this memory of Caesar, right? Like this positive memory, this man that kind of helped her break free. And this speaks to the importance of moving forward, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. And you see that in that final scene. And by the end of this limited series, despite all these horrible things that have happened, you feel more hopeful, right? And you feel hopeful because of the perspective and the way that Barry Jenkins chose to tell this story. And ultimately, it was quite beautiful. There's so much to say. And, you know, you guys let me know what you think. You know, please add. And until next time, thank you so much.